My apologies. Hi, everyone. I am Liz, and I'm the Commission's Administrator for Human Rights Department. And I am so excited tonight. I think I'm personally excited even more because I have Ross Harris here, and I have heard so much about her, and I really want to learn a lot from her tonight. So I really want to say before we get started, thank you. I know you all had a busy schedule today, but thank you for joining us. And hopefully, not hopefully, I know we will learn a lot. If you have any questions, please feel free to place in the chat. Myself, as well as Commissioner Sue Polinsky, will be looking back and forth and then trying to answer. But once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Commissioner Polinsky, I'm going to hand it to you.
Sue, you're on mute.
Was talking, but I was muted. Okay, I'm happy that everybody's here. Thank you. This is the third episode of Let's Talk Access. Last year we did Let's Talk Law. Those are available on YouTube, and each of these will go on YouTube. Tonight, our theme for this year is Let's Talk Access. And one of the things people need access for is being able to run for office. They need access to vote, they need access to run for office so that we have represented. It's what the Human Rights Commission is about, that everybody is represented. So when we started to put this together, I figured if we're going to talk about running for office, there's just one person I'd call, and that's Ross Harris. Ross is personally one of my best friends. She's my Bryan series buddy. And Ross is a Greensboro native, and more important, a graduate of Duke University. And she got her BA and MBA there. She's got 40 years of national and international marketing experience on both the client and agency sides. You can go to the harrispartners.com to learn more about that. But the interesting stuff for tonight is that Ross has extensive experience as both a campaign manager and a political strategist in partisan, nonpartisan, and referendum campaigns. She's well known in the triad. I will mention something about that in a moment. For her work as the initial project manager for the Stephen Tanger Performing Arts Center. Ross built the framework for getting that through. There were a lot of people involved, but Ross worked on that a lot. It's good to be her partner. When we go to the Tanger Center, they treat her very nicely. It was a 2-year initiative that involved input from the entire Greensboro community. What she did was development, city council approval, and community support. In 2014, she became the executive director of the North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership, which we call IOPL. It's an organization that helps improve the practice of democracy through its premier nonpartisan leadership training program for public servants. She was named an honorary fellow of the Institute in December 2015. Then she went to the Community Foundation, where she was director of marketing and communications. And as much as Ross knows everybody in the community and everybody knows Ross, she's extremely active at Duke. She served as president of the Duke University Alumni Association and as a member of the Duke University Board of Trustees, as well as a member of the Terry Sanford Institute of Public Policy's Board of Visitors. She's a member of the Board of Advisors of the Duke Cancer Institute, the Preston Robert Tisch Brain Tumor Center, and Duke Supportive Care and Survivorship Center. So that pretty much tells you what she does when she's not working. Ross is passionate about this city. She works with Greensboro Day School, Greensboro Rotary. She's on the board of Cone Health Foundation, Greensboro Sports Council, First Presbyterian Church. And then there's Henry. Henry is the poodle, and he's a miniature apricot poodle, and he is a fan of golf, just like Ross, and of the Duke Blue Devils. So that's Ross, and there's so much more I could tell you, but that wouldn't be nice. So what we're going to do is let Ross go through her program. And if you have questions, please put them in chat. We have dedicated time for Q&A, and I'm looking forward to it. So Ross, you're on, and I'm going to mute, and let's see what happens.
Well, thank you. So you're way too generous and way too kind with that introduction. I greatly appreciate it. But I love this topic. I absolutely love it. I love talking to people about why it's important that they run. We need great people to run. So why it's important and the things you ought to think about as you throw your hat into the ring. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So our agenda for the evening, and Sue's going to click the slides for me. So we thought, and again, we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much we can talk about, but the important things I think is who should run for office? Should you run? And importantly, why are you running? What has gotten into your mind that makes you think this is something you'd like to do? Secondly, what are the options for local elected office? I think that's what we're really focusing on here is more local elections. So when are those held? How much does it cost? How do I run for office? How do we get started? So we're going to talk about some things to think about and how to begin your strategy. And then we're going to allow some time for Q&A with me, but also some conversation with some elected officials who are on the call tonight. So let's get started. So let's set the stage a little bit. And what we're going to say here, I don't think is going to be a surprise to anybody. Today's political environment has never been more difficult. And I don't think anybody is going to question this or need an explanation. Polarization of parties has never been more disparate, never. Ethics, there are a couple things currently in the news about ethics. Candidate quality, I hear a lot that people say the right people aren't running. Why don't the right people run? Security is an issue, and people are angry, and I think we see that every day. All you have to do is read the newspaper or watch the news. And so all those things really affect the political environment. Importantly, those things, it's smart to be aware, but those things should not dissuade you from running. Hopefully those things will motivate you to be a change maker. We need people to get involved and to want to be involved. So don't let those things discourage you. So very importantly, know why you want to run. And here's some things that I hear people talk about. I want to make a difference. And that is a great reason to run for office. Do you think you're going to get power by running? Notoriety? Money? I tell you, those three things, maybe, but those aren't reasons to run, really. But there's no right or wrong personality, I think, to run. People say, if you had to tell somebody that they've got the right stuff or don't have the right stuff, I don't think there's a right or wrong personality. But importantly, I think how you react and respond to others, particularly in difficult situations, that's really the key in terms of whether you should be in elective office, because not everyone is cut out to be an elected official. I remember when I was beginning my career and talking to people about being in politics, and they presented me with two options. You can run or you can have the Rolodex. And I said, I want the Rolodex. I didn't want to run. I knew myself, I thought too well to know that I didn't want to be an elected official, but I sure did want to have some influence. And I thought the best way for me to do that was being a campaign manager and a strategist. There are highs and lows in every campaign, and you got to take the good with the bad. That's just the way that goes. But importantly, for me, the bottom line is holding public office is a career of service. If you're in it for any other reason, money, notoriety, power, you shouldn't run. You really should not run, because it's and we'll talk about this in a minute, but it takes a lot of time, commitment, and dedication. So it really is a career of service. So my theory is that leadership has to be learned. I don't think people necessarily are born leaders. Maybe, but I really think people can learn to be a good leader. Importantly, it's not your way or the highway. That is not leadership. And sometimes being a great follower is leadership. Think about that for a minute. Listening is the greatest skill you can cultivate. I have learned this over the years. One of the things that I used to teach in IUPL was everybody has the right to their journey. Someone's journey is not, it's not your your place to criticize how they got to that point of view, and nor can they criticize how you got to your point of view. But listen to how they got there. You just might learn something. It'll make you a better person, a more well-educated, well-rounded person. And doing the right thing can be hard and it can be unpopular. So running for office and being elected is not for the faint of heart. So things to consider. Do I have the time to run and the time to serve? It takes a lot of time to do both. Probably takes more time to serve than to run. Is now the timing right for me to serve? Things you have to think about are your job, your family, things in your own life. Very importantly, is my family supportive? Believe me, if your family is not supportive, you should not run, because it affects the entire family. Will my employer be supportive? That's another key thing. You'll be in and out of the office more than likely. So your employer really needs to be supportive. Can I financially afford to serve? There's some people who are in positions where they're independent enough that they have that flexibility, but some people can't. So if the answer to all of these is yes, then definitely do it. So
Ross, do you want to ask anybody to comment on some of these?
Yeah, I sure do. We're lucky enough to have several elected officials with us tonight, and I'd love to just ask those folks to chime in on these things and what was their experience. And not to put anybody on the spot, but Tammy, let's start with you. Were these things operative for you in your decision, because you were a student at IOPL, and we were talking about these things and helping you to decide if you wanted to run and what the right office to run for you was. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'm happy to. And Mary Kay and Mayor Vaughn, feel free to chime in anytime, because we can all work off of each other on this. I think the time commitment is huge. And I think the time commitment, both in running and serving, that's a big piece. It's not just, meetings twice a month and a work session once a month. There's something like that. The commitment, and to do the job well, you have to be out in the community. You have to have time with your constituents. And that takes away from family and from job. If you don't have an employer that can be supportive of you and you're working full-time or even working part-time, I would encourage somebody to wait until they are working for an employer that does. I was fortunate, I work full-time, but I was fortunate enough to work for an organization where the principals appreciated public service and were committed to public service in their lives as well as the lives of those they cared for. So they were very supportive of me. But I am probably away from if I look at a normal 40-hour work week, it's not unusual for me to be gone half or a third to a half of that work week for various meetings and things. So
Tammy, excuse me, did your employer encourage you to run? How'd you bring it up with them?
I kind of put on my big girl panties and asked for a meeting and said, I'm thinking about doing this, but I need to know whether or not this is okay with you, because it's going to impact you. And this is how it's going to impact you. And here's where I'm willing to give. I'm a morning person, so ask me to be at the office at 5:30 in the morning, no problem. Ask me to stay late at night, there are bigger problems. So, I am lucky to have a job where, as long as the job got done, that's what they cared about. And so we were able to come up with that joining. Family is another huge piece, because it's a huge time suck. And again, both while you're running and serving. And even the financial piece, I was surprised at how much it cost me not only to run, but to attend all the events that I needed to go to and to be all the places, that was a dollar figure that I hadn't anticipated going in. And it was a bit of a surprise and a shocker to me.
Yeah, one of the surprising things I've heard is that that's why historically, not now, but historically, the only people who could really run for local office were either retired or rich. And,
Yes.
and that's why we got older, a skewed set of values and principles. Mary Kay, what was your experience?
Yes, thank you. I mean, Tammy's hit on most everything there. I would say that I was running my business, so I did have the luxury of having extra time. I had not really wanted to or thought about running for an election in any capacity, but having a small business, I was intrigued by how much the city kind of governed what I did every day. I think we've all heard the phrase that, all politics is local because the city affects whatever you do every day of your residency in that city. And that is so true. I think that I got the urge to think about running. I started going to city council meetings. I was watching them on TV and I thought, that's pretty interesting. So I took City Academy. I learned a lot about it. Having my own business, I had a good staff. My family was very supportive. My children actually were the ones who said, being a small business, I guess I complained a little bit about the city. And so my kids said, Mom, you need to do something about that, quit complaining. And of course, my husband's been thoroughly supportive. So it is a big financial drain when you think of it, because it's a part-time job that takes full-time hours. Now I'm speaking, only of city council. When you get to other things, I mean, even state rep or state senator, they don't get much money. So you really have to be passionate about it. You have to want to be able to do it. You have to be able to, give your time to your constituents. And, I really love that part, but, also it can be draining. So I certainly wouldn't tell someone it's always going to be a lovely time, because, you'll have people come at you, you'll have people be supportive, you'll have people not be supportive. But, I wouldn't go back and change a thing, I don't think, because I really enjoy what I do.
Mary Kay, one of the things that impresses me about you is every so often I go over to Facebook and see what's happening. You are just everywhere. And now she's putting dates and times on them. I mean, it's stunning. Thank you for that. Nancy, Mayor Vaughn, you were the city council representative, and then you ran for mayor. And then I think there was a time in between, and then you came back again as mayor. It's very exciting. What drives you? What makes you do this? You're muted. Nancy, unmute. Hang on.
Sorry about that. I got involved with the rezoning issue along New Garden Road. It feels like it was yesterday, but there are probably a whole lot of people who live in Greensboro and don't recall how divisive the zoning issue was. It was over 1,200 acres. It was county agricultural at the time. And you see what New Garden Road looks like now. And actually what it looks like now is far different from what it was proposed with density and commercial and a hotel and a bunch of other things. So I got very involved in that. And our District 4 rep had decided not to run again, and I was encouraged to run. I was fortunate. I did work full time. I spoke to my employer about it, and I told him that I need to cut my hours back to 80%, which they were fine with, but they also cut my salary back accordingly, which I guess is fair. It is a drain on an employer, because I know the amount of phone calls that I would get during the week that our receptionist would really have to talk to some angry people unrelated to our business. And the day of our city council meeting, she was always slammed with phone calls. So I had a really good employer. I served from 97 to 2001. I got married, got pregnant, and decided that I had a higher calling at the moment, that I wanted to spend time with my infant daughter. When she was a very mature 8-year-old, I ran again at large, and I served 2 terms at large, and now I think I'm in my 4th term as mayor. Your family does have to be supportive because they are running with you, and they will come under scrutiny. My daughter loves it because she's kind of a policy wonk like I am and her father is. When I talk to my boys now, who were teenagers when I ran the first time, I'm really surprised and somewhat saddened how absent they thought I was during those 4 years. And I thought I was doing a good job juggling city council, being a mom, and working. And at that point in my life, I think my family paid a little bit of a price. And so you have to really consider the big picture and what time it will take out, not only of your working hours, but of your family hours.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Nancy Hoffman, who's District 4 City Council Rep. And Nancy, we were talking about what's on the screen with family and time and what does it cost and all that. And we're kind of running a little long, but I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, I think these are all good questions to ask and consider when you're running for office. I had served 5 years on the city's Human Relations Commission, but and during that time decided to run for office. But it's a very time consuming. It's in this city today, I'm sure the mayor will agree. It's really a full-time job being mayor, being a member of city council. If you're really doing what you need to do and what the citizens need and the city need you to do. And your family has to be supportive. I sort of look back on my first several years on council and think that, my time with my husband suffered as a result of that to some extent. I think that's really something that you have to consider. I'm watching a series on Netflix now, Borgen, which is the story of a woman who headed up the moderate party in Denmark and becomes prime minister. And it's really very telling in terms of the effect that it had on her family, her husband and her children. I've not been through the whole series at this point, but I think you really have to be prepared for how you juggle your life.
That's like what 4 people have told us. And it's important to me that the 4 people who have talked are all women. And
I think it's much more difficult for women than it is for men, Sue.
life is that way, but especially on this. Okay, Ross.
I think it's the same thing if you're in the corporate world too, if you're a woman, how you juggle your personal and family responsibilities with your profession.
That's true.
Okay, let's go to Ross again. There you go.
Okay, so people oftentimes ask me, what are my options if I want to pursue elective office locally? And the most well-known things are city council, the county commission, and the board of education. And if you want to know which district you live in for any of those 3, that website there will take you to maps where you can find out which districts that you live in. This is just one example city council district map, and you can see there are different shaded areas that show who the reps are for each of those areas.
Those are some complicated districts.
Yeah.
Okay,
are.
here.
Okay, so general candidate requirements. What does it take? What are the things that you have to qualify for to be able to run? You have to be a citizen of the United States. You have to be 21 years of age to run by the date of the general election per the North Carolina Constitution. Legal resident of Guilford County 30 days before the date of the next election. And you can't be serving a sentence for a felony conviction, including probation, parole, or post-release supervision.
I believe this case is right now in front of the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Yep.
Where 54,000 people who had been incarcerated but are not anymore And some of them have to pay fines and some may be on probation.
Mhm.
And the lower court said they need to be allowed to vote. And the Supreme Court is listening to it now.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
So to be able to register to vote, you have to be 18 years of age, but you can't run until you're 21 per the Constitution. And you have to pay filing fees. And those are interesting. It's relatively inexpensive to run for council. And mayor, $75, city council, $25. The county commission, $312. Board of Education, $207. I think those are odd figures. I don't know how they were arrived at, but it's significantly more expensive. The filing fees are for those offices than for city council, which I find really interesting. Now, in terms of the calendar, in terms of when to file, 2022 was not a typical year. And we don't really need to focus on these dates so much because it was a very atypical year, but we ended up having the general election in the summer. And this is because of the census. We want to make sure that the districts weren't going to change because of the census that was done in 2020. So we ended up having a general election for municipalities in the middle of the summer, which is not when you want to have an election. People are on vacation. It's just a very strange time. So this was not a typical year, but hopefully we're going to get back to some regularity in 2023. So the filing dates for municipal races in 2023, there will be no Greensboro elections this year because we just had them. But for High Point and other small towns, filing dates begin at noon on July the 7th and continue through noon on July the 21st. In 2025, we will have Greensboro mayor and city council races, and those filing dates will be noon, as I keep saying noon July 4th through noon on July the 18th. 2024 is a presidential year, so things get a little wonky here in that the filing for all offices that will take place in 2025 will be in December. And the reason for this is the presidential primaries March the 4th. So they're going to need to know who's running ASAP in order to get the ballots printed. So I think the message here is that depends upon what you're running for and which municipality you're in. Just keep in touch with what those dates are. You can find those on the Board of Election website. So I wanted to go through each of those three local elections to give you an idea as to some of the specifics. City council elections are all nonpartisan. Our representatives certainly are affiliated with one party or another or independent, but the elections themselves are nonpartisan. City council has 9 members. We have the mayor, who is elected at large, 3 at-large seats, and 5 district seats. And the terms are now 4 years. They used to be just 2 years, and they're now 4 years. Typically held at odd-numbered years. This, of course, last year was an even-numbered year. It was an odd time. So the next time we will have city council elections will be 2025.
I want to ask a question that came up. Recently, we changed from city council and mayor from 2 years to 4. Tammy, do you think that was a good idea? 4 years instead of 2? Everybody's muted.
I do think it was a good idea, quite frankly, because it takes you some time to learn your job once you're in the job. So, your first year serving is a lot of learning as well as doing, but a lot of learning. If it were a 2-year term, you'd really just be learning what you're doing. And it's time to run again, and you wouldn't have accomplished anything, and you'd really have nothing to run on. So I think it's a good idea. I wish that my personal preference would be that we would be staggered rather than all running at the same time. But that's not the way it works.
Okay, thank you. And Ross, we ready to go to the next slide?
Absolutely. And Tammy brings up an interesting point about staggered races, because the next 2 groups we're going to talk about do have staggered elections. County commission. These are partisan races. So people are affiliated with the party and they run on those party platforms. There are 9 members also on the county commission. 8 districts, only 1 at-large seat. And I said 4-year terms, they are staggered. And those elections happen in even numbered years. Responsibilities, they're responsible for adopting the annual budget and property tax rate. They adopt ordinances or local laws that govern issues such as development, noise, animal control. And they're also responsible for appointing volunteers to serve on various boards and commissions.
Okey dokey.
And the Board of Education, it's also partisan. Also 9 members, 8 districts, 1 at large, so there's some commonality there. They too are staggered 4-year terms. Responsibilities, they establish policies that govern the school system, not surprising. And they also evaluate the district's achievement and monitors its progress, making sure that all the goals are met.
Okay, I've got a question.
Sure.
If you run, Tammy said, I think, earlier that it takes time to learn your job. Do city council or Guilford County commissioners, or maybe even the Board of Education, is there anybody that the county or the city supplies, like a city staffer, that helps city council people? Do you get any information? Do they tell you what to read? Do they read it for you and summarize it? How do you approach all that getting to know stuff? Mary Kay, you want to take that one?
Sure. So we do have an orientation for all members, actually. Of course, there's orientation for new members. You know, a lot of it is learning from your colleagues. That's, you know, I learned a lot from the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, you know, if I ever had a question or anything. So there is a learning curve. I mean, I felt like I kind of knew what was going on because I took the city academy and I went to all the city council meetings, but still it's something totally different when you are on council. So there are people who can help you, and staff, of course, tends to be very helpful if you have questions about certain things. But we have to take an ethics course through the School of Government, and also on some of the boards and commissions we're on, we have to do that as well. So, you know, it is a learning experience. I always like to say I learn something new every day, and I really do. And if I'm not sure, I'll ask someone who's been there a while, like the mayor or Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, or, you know, I'll ask a staff member or something. So, you know, you just have to be willing to ask those questions and know what you don't know. You know, learn what you don't know.
This is one of my favorite cartoons. I love Shu. He says, having been in Washington a long time, I'm familiar with the nuts and bolts of politics. And the answer is, so are we. If we get any more nuts getting elected, we're gonna bolt. So, yeah, just something to try to bring a little levity into the equation here. But the point here, we're gonna talk about campaign plans. How do you think about running? What are the things you need to know? And you've got to have a plan. I love the Beatles. I love George Harrison. A quote from one of his songs: "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." And that's true, but you really need to figure out what road you're on and what your plan is. So the elements of a campaign plan, again, I make my candidates actually write down, why are you running? Know the key issues in your district and your position on them, and know your strengths and weaknesses. Ask for help. This is something that is so helpful. Ask someone, a friend, a colleague, you know, what do you think I'm good at? And where do you think I need work? Someone who can be more objective about you than you can. And that's a very valuable question to ask. Opposition research. Look at your opponent's track record. What is their position on issues? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Analyze your district. And this, for me, this is one that I love getting into the numbers, the analysis, but look at demographics. Who are your voters? Who lives there? Sex, age, race, income, education, party affiliation, all of this information is important and pretty easy to find. So following, there's some examples of what some of these charts are things I've actually done for candidates in the past. See, I apologize. That's the next slide. Analyze previous races. Look for patterns that happened in the past 3 races for whatever office you're running for. Understand how much money was spent on previous races. That will help you understand what you can afford, like staff, yard signs, those kinds of things. What was the turnout? In other words, how many people came out to vote? Who were they? Key races happening at the same time are relevant. So for example, the year that you're running for office or plan to run for office, was that a presidential election year, a gubernatorial year? Because those things will affect turnout. Your budget, gosh, I mean, figure out what your budget is and stick to it. And we'll talk in a minute about how you can do that.
Ross, how do you find out what was spent on a previous campaign?
Yep. And this is one of the things I love more than anything in the entire world. Like I said, I'm a real geek. Campaign finance reports. Boy, when those things come out, I'm like a kid on Christmas morning. I run to the State Board of Elections website and I look to see who has filed and how they spent their money. Which you can also find out on those reports is who contributed money to them and how much. So you begin to find out who your supporters are and who your supporters aren't. You can find out, as far as that goes, anything you want to know from a campaign finance report. So you'll find out what people have spent before and things that they use, things they didn't use. And particularly for a new candidate, that's really going to help guide you in terms of what's necessary and what's not necessary. Websites. It's so important to have a website dedicated just for your campaign. Do not use your own personal site. That's mixing apples and oranges. It's really important to have one just dedicated to your campaign. Now, these are some charts that I've done before that help me analyze the districts for people I was helping run. I don't remember exactly which one this was for, but we looked at the total voters. We looked by race, by age, sex, by party affiliation. So the total of voters and what the percent was to understand what the makeup of that district was. The next one is a little bit of an eye chart, but it's another one that talked about by precinct. What were those demographics by precinct? That's important to know too. For example, if I'm helping somebody run for, I'll make this up, District 4, Nancy Hoffman's district, I need to understand what the precincts are in her district and what the makeup is for those precincts. Because if I'm going to help someone in District 4 versus District 5, the makeup of those districts may be entirely different depending upon which precincts are in those districts. And these are data sources, and I've checked those. These are the ones that I use. But there are a lot of ways to get the data. It's really pretty easy to get it. If you're not good at analysis, find somebody, a volunteer or a staffer that is good, because this is such an important thing to do, is to do your homework with a campaign plan and understand what those numbers are.
Oh, hang on. Okay.
Okay, people sometimes say, I'm building my campaign team. How many people do I need? What are the roles I need? So key members of your team, I think you need a campaign manager. You need someone who's sort of at the center of the wheel, the hub of the wheel, who kind of keeps the train on the track. I think it's important for that person to know how to deal with the press. And the reason I say that is that as you are representing a candidate, you've got to be so comfortable and know that candidate so well that you can speak on their behalf. And sometimes candidates aren't as available because they're doing other things. So you have to be able to speak on their behalf, and you need to understand how to deal with the press. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But I think that's a quality for a campaign manager that's really important. You do need a treasurer. This person is responsible for the campaign finance reports, and there's a schedule that you have to file these on. You have to disclose who gives you money, how you spend that money accurately and timely, and you do have to be trained. You take training. This course is through the North Carolina Board of Elections website. And I always tell my candidates, do not be your own treasurer. You don't have time to do it. You just opens you up for liability that you just don't need. So it's important to find someone else that you trust to be your treasurer. You need a social media person. In the time that I've been doing this, social media has become so critical. When I started, it was not as important, but now it is absolutely critical. And that person also manages the website. So those are some really core roles on a campaign team. This is also important too. I call it the old friend. And the way to describe this, in my opinion, is someone who remembers you when your nickname was Stinky on the playground. And all that means is someone that's known you forever, who can look at you and say, you know something, you're getting out of line. Your ego is getting out of line, or you're not being truthful in this regard. Just somebody that knows your heart and soul and can keep you honest and humble. So you need to have that person on your team. Volunteers are critical, and usually they're pretty easy to find. You'll have a group of folks who believe in you and want to help you get elected. And you don't have to pay those people necessarily either. So finding volunteers to help in those areas is really important. Okay, fundraising. This is also incredibly important because you need to have money to run. Your campaign plan is going to tell you how much you need to raise, and you're going to find that out from looking at those campaign finance reports and getting a feel for how much money has been spent before, and also how much money are you willing to spend of your own money. I always tell candidates I try to not get them in the habit of financing their own campaigns. You don't want to lose that money, and you also want to demonstrate that you have support, that people are willing to contribute to your campaign. If they look and see that you're the only one supporting yourself, and that doesn't say you've got the widespread support that I think you need to give yourself credibility. So you may have to put a little bit in and pay yourself back, and that happens a lot. But try to stay away from that. That's just my opinion. So ways to raise money. Personal solicitation by the candidate. That's the candidate asking for money, which I think is really important. Campaign website should have a donate button. If you have a finance committee, they can solicit donors. Volunteers can solicit donors. You can have events, fundraising emails, letters. Also, political action committees and political party committees. Those are less relevant on a local level, but that's another way to raise money.
I want to ask Mayor Vaughn a question. Nancy, you're muted, but you've run for city council and mayor. Is there any way, oh, you're trying to eat dinner too, that's a shame, I'm sorry.
No,
But is there any way you could guesstimate an average amount on a regular election? What does it cost to run for city council? What does it cost to run for mayor?
So I think mayor and at large are different than the district races because districts can be more targeted. Historically, I am not a huge fundraiser. It is something that I absolutely hate, as Ross will attest to. There are some people who are really good about fundraising and making those calls. I'm not one of them. And I am usually outraised by my opponent. I may have had one race where I raised more money than my opponent. But this is not my comfort zone.
So do you have a ballpark? I mean, it's open information, I suppose, but could you give us a number as to what you spent on or what an average is that's spent on a campaign?
So, I think the mayor's race, I've raised maybe a high of 125, which is,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money. My opponents have raised more. And then when you look at cities like Charlotte, they're raising in the $450,000 range. And they are also considered part-time mayors. North Carolina is interesting where all mayors and city council are part-time, and that typically they're run by professional staff, city manager, county manager.
Okay, so I would agree that fundraising is probably the least favorite thing you do. I'd agree, but 125 was just more than I thought. Wow.
Oh yeah, and
Okay.
I've managed campaigns where it was more than that.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, for the same kind of offices. So when you do your campaign plan, it's important to figure out what your budget's going to be early on and stick with it. And this can be a ball that rolls as time goes on. Oh, I need this, I need that, or my opponent's doing this or that, so therefore I should too. And sometimes you lose perspective. So establish that budget early on and really try to stick with it. what is absolutely necessary for me to win. For me, for example, buttons, hats, t-shirts, I think is a waste of money. I really do. But things that I think are important are a qualified staff, a quality staff. People, I'm a great believer in yard signs. I really am, because it shows you drive down the street and you see who's supporting who. And if you see somebody in a home and say, wow, I really admire that person. They're supporting candidate A. Wow, that means something to me. So I think yard signs are really important. Mailing lists, walking lists, and mailing lists, you would use those for sending out letters to raise money, for example, or other kinds of things. Walking lists. I'm a great believer in getting my candidates to walk and knock on doors. This is a smidge off topic, but I just think there's running a campaign. There are parts of it that the old-fashioned approach is really the most effective, and that is looking at someone in the
Yes.
eye, shaking their hand, and asking for their vote. And sometimes I've actually been standing at polls with a sign and have people come up to me and say, I'm going to vote for that person because they knocked on my door. And I'm not kidding you, because that they took the time to get to know somebody. So I'm a great believer in knocking on doors, and there are lists you can buy that will tell you who's registered to vote in your district, or by house, who's a Democrat, who's a Republican, who typically votes in local elections, all those kinds of things. So that's what I'm talking about there. Fundraisers, you don't need to go overboard and have filet mignon at your fundraiser. People are there to meet you and hear your ideas, and I don't think they're expecting really expensive food. So I wouldn't suggest you go overboard there, but those things are necessary. Bumper stickers, again, that's one thing that I personally like to do. A campaign that I managed for Robbie Perkins in 2007 when he ran for city council at large. That was the first time magnetic bumper stickers were used in this community. And it just was an idea I had. And because everyone hates bumper stickers, they stick to your bumper. You can't get them off. They take the paint off. And I thought, how about a magnetic bumper sticker? It just seemed to make a lot of sense. And boy, those things have really caught on. So that to me is a useful way to spend money. Paid media, as we have watched unfortunately the demise of local newspapers over the years, running ads, for example, in print has become less important over the years. Most of the paid media now that I do is mostly online kinds of things. We did some TV last time for Nancy, but I think the more broadcast way, broadcast newspapers, those expenditures or spending money in those categories are getting less and less, and more on social media more and more.
Well, Nancy Hoffman did knock on my door. So there's that. But Tammy, you did an enormous, other people did too. I just heard this from Tammy, an enormous amount of walking and meeting people. And then we talked about the post-campaign flu that you got. Every candidate at the end of a campaign seems to get sick because you're just exhausted. But Tammy, was knocking on doors something that you liked? You did? What was it effective? What do you think?
Knocking on doors is why I won the elections that I won. It absolutely made a huge difference, especially as a new candidate,
Yeah.
because if people don't know you, they're not going to support you. And it's part that I found the hardest to get started with, but it also ended up being my favorite part of the campaign was the one-on-one conversations that I had with people.
Tammy, were people nice to you?
95% of the time, people are nice. People are so excited that you took the time to be there. I was shocked because I really expected people to be as if I was, calling them on the phone and, a solicitor from the 1-800 number or something. But people were genuinely, for the most part, very happy to see you and very happy to talk to you and impressed that you cared. And as Ross said, I can't tell you how many people would come up to me when I was working the polls on election day and went, "You were at my house, and you were here and you were there," and people were really impressed that I remembered that. Yeah, I hate to say this and admit it, but sometimes I remember people by their dogs, and I could say, "Oh, you were the one with the cute gray poodle," or this, that, or the other. And it's a good connection. And it's a way that once you're holding office, when somebody picks up the phone to call you, it kind of opens the door because they've met you before and you took the time to meet them. So
Cool.
I
Thank you.
can't say enough about it. It's exhausting. It doesn't matter. This past election, our first day of knocking doors was in the snow, and our last day of knocking doors was at 90-some degrees. You
Okay,
gotta-
better you than me, Tammy. That
You got-
was hard.
You gotta do it, and it's worth every bit of it.
Okay, Ross.
So a little more about fundraising, and I just specified some donor circles, which is so things like personal and professional contacts. These would be family, friends, colleagues, people you work with. Ideological contacts, for example, asking people who have your either same party or believe in an issue that you believe in. That's another way to cut it. Also, thinking about someone who has an axe to grind, people that don't like your opponent. If you knew there's someone who just doesn't like your opponent, ask them for money. And also, sometimes people, they want to support a winner. And so if you believe that you're going to win and you have good reasons to believe that people are going to vote for you, people want to support the person who's going to win. So that's a good way to think about how to raise your money. And the most important fundraising tool in the campaign is you. And yes, Nancy, I'm talking to you. Yeah, she does not like to raise money, and by her own admission, she's not good at it, and that's okay.
Correct.
But most of the time, as a candidate, I tell people you've got to have call time. And what that means is if I have to lock you in a room with a list of names and the phone and their phone numbers, and I take your cell phone away from you, so you have to use another phone, I'm going to do that. It's a set amount of time that's dedicated just to raising that money, a quiet room, your script. I tell people, write your script out. That way you have to say, "Hi, you kind of have a little bit of a script." It's an easy thing to do to ask people. Most people don't like cold calling, and I certainly understand that. But I just think it's really, really important that the candidate be part of their fundraising. And Nancy, I'll wear you down. Somehow I'll teach you how to do this. I don't know how, but you're going to love this, girl. Somehow we're going to get this done. This is something that I am passionate about, and that is campaign finance rules. I told you that I love to look at the campaign finance reports, which is true. But you've got to read the rules. This is something that will trip you up if you don't understand it. And believe me, you may think, "Hey, I'm running for city council in a small town." Someone will look at those campaign finance reports, see that you've made a mistake, and nail you for it. And there are people who do that, who monitor the reports for that reason. So you have to file if your campaign raises or spends over $10,000. I'm sorry, that number should be $1,000. I apologize. $1,000.
I'll fix it.
That's okay. No problem. That's my fault. The maximum contribution per person that you can donate went up January 1st of this year. It used to be 5,400 or 5,200 rather. It's now 6,400. So what that means is if I could give $6,400 to a candidate in a primary, and then I can give another $6,400 for the general. So you can give twice, but it's per cycle or per election.
And is that per person? So let's just say two married people, they could each give 6,400.
Yes,
Cool.
they can. Now there are some exceptions. A candidate and their spouses, they can donate an unlimited amount of money to their campaign, to the campaign. Political party executive committees can give an unlimited amount. This is not as relevant for a local election, but I just wanted to put the exceptions out there. And also what they call independent expenditure committees, what we call super PACs, who are formed to support issues, that kind of thing. You'll see when commercials air, paid for by, and sometimes these things have very obscure names, paid for by people who like apricot poodles, for example. That's just, you know, and the candidate has no control over how much money they give, or whether they can accept it or not. If they give it, they take it. So it's a very not a gray area as much as, but it can be a very controversial a way to raise money. So I just throw that out there. So there are a lot of prohibited ways to raise money. Golf tournaments, hole sponsorship, free use of a golf course is prohibited. Advertising paid for by business is not allowed. Space for fundraisers, donation of food or supplies, donation of auction items, no anonymous contributions. This means if you are passing the hat, you can't count that money. That is not allowed. Collection plates, fundraisers where names of individuals are not obtained. If you've been to a fundraiser and someone says, I need to know what your occupation is and what your address is, that's why. You can't accept money from somebody unless if you don't know who they are, where they live, and what they do for a living. This is also important, and I just saw yesterday, I believe there was someone was being challenged for this. You can't make a contribution made in the name of another person. So, for example, suppose I give $6,400 to someone, and my husband then decides to, or then I also decide to give $6,400 in the name of my son, for example. I can't do that. My son has to give that $6,400. So you can't make a contribution in the name of another person. And a contributor may not make a cash donation for more than $50. You have to have a paper trail, credit card or check. So again, and I can't stress this enough, don't ignore the campaign finance laws. It's the easiest way and quickest way to get into trouble. When in doubt, call the Board of Elections, and they are there to help. They really are. Both locally and at the state level. They have at the state level, they have a team of what they call investigators who do nothing but answer the phone. So it's easy to get help, and there's no excuse for being ignorant about it. Endorsements. These can be very persuasive to voters, and typically what happens is that candidates will be asked to interview, and the organizations that are endorsing will decide if they're going to give their endorsement or not. So some examples of things around here, the Replacements PAC, their focus is LGBTQ. The Simpkins PAC has more of an African-American focus, that the candidates they endorse are aware of the issues affecting African-Americans. They're also the firefighters and the police. All of those things, getting the endorsements of some of those well-known organizations can be really helpful and can cause a lot of voter influence, which is great. If you can tell someone you've got the endorsement, for example, of all those organizations, people say, wow, that gives them a lot of credibility. So
Russ, can you explain how PACs work?
Let's see, sure. Political Action Committee, that's what we were talking about earlier, the PAC or a super PAC. And so they raise money and they give money to candidates that support things that are important to them. So for example, Replacements PAC, for example, I knew someone that actually ran that PAC. So they would research people that were running for office and to see how they felt about issues pertaining to the LGBTQ community. And they felt that the things that were important to those folks, that candidate was going to represent them well on those issues, they would endorse them.
Cool. Okay. Hang on.
Any candidate want to weigh in on that and add anything to that? Okay. And this is something I love. This is another area, having been in marketing communications also, on the other hand, press releases and media coverage are important. So Sue was asking me, what's the right way to write a press release? How's the best way to do that? So The way I think about it is a press release is a statement to the media. It can be an announcement, meaning Nancy Vaughn decided to run for re-election as mayor in 2022. It can be news about the candidate. It can be talking about an upcoming event that you want the public to know about. It can be about a recent accomplishment, an award you won, an endorsement you might have gotten. And it can also be your take on an issue of the day. But importantly, it is not a feature story. I can't tell you how many press releases I've read that are 3 pages long. The way I teach folks to write them is it's almost a tease, if you will. And it can turn into a feature story. It can turn into a longer story, but it's not intended to be a 3-page feature article. Importantly, before you begin, think about, is this something that's newsworthy? Because a reporter isn't going to run it, isn't going to talk to you about it if it's not newsworthy. So you have to ask yourself, why is this news? Would readers and viewers find it interesting and relevant to them if they listened to it or read about it? Is it topical? Has the reporter done a story about this recently? When you're pitching stories to the media, it needs to be something that they're not going to come back and tell you, hey, Ross, I've done that before. I've already done 3 stories about that. You want to make sure that this is something that if the reporter has developed an interest in that story, it's going to be something that he or she hasn't talked about recently. It's more of an update. You're updating that reporter and the public about changes in an evolution about an issue, for example.
I'd like to ask Nancy Hoffman a question. Nancy, do you write press releases? Do you write them yourself? Do you have people who do them? How do you do press releases?
I have a professional journalist who's done all of our materials since my very first campaign, and her husband is our graphic designer and does the website and has done the design for all of our materials, including yard signs, the website, all of our campaign materials.
Okay, let me ask you a hypothetical.
Yeah.
If you have 2 choices, you can either pay them or they can be volunteers. Is
Yeah.
that legal for them to do work and not get paid because they want to?
Sure. I mean, that, Ross, I mean, that can be done by volunteer. It happens that, you know, I've paid, you know, I've paid staff on all of my campaigns, which is
Okay.
why I raise as much money as I do,
And that is
Yeah.
absolutely right. That is
because
absolutely
we've
right.
used professional staff for everything that we do.
That's probably a good idea.
But also, I'll piggyback on that and say, in my first campaign, 2011, when I was really running as almost a total unknown, I think we clocked in that I did about 250 miles over 4 months, knocking on doors, door to door. And that was a major reason that I won that campaign by 4 points.
Wow.
It makes
Ross?
a difference. It sounds like a small thing, but it's not.
Yeah. And
So-
just Tammy, I constantly have people, you know, who I meet maybe for the first time again, who said, you know, you knocked on my door, whatever it was.
Oops.
I'm a big believer in billboards as well. Ross knows that. I've
Yep.
used a lucky billboard since my very first campaign, and
Yep. And we
come up to me and they said, "Oh, we thought you were taller."
Anyway, there was so much to cover. I didn't get into outdoor in this thing, but Nancy's right. You can choose the outdoor board based on where the folks that live in your district, where they drive. It can be very, very sophisticated, and Nancy really has used that very, very effectively in all of her campaigns. So just a few tips for news coverage. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg here, but sending a release by email to reporters, tailor the release to each type of media outlet. So for example, if you know that there's a reporter that covers local politics, send your news release to that reporter, not to XYZ newspaper or newsroom. Send it to the person that's going to cover the story. In the topic line, put the topic of the release. Do not say press release, because if you do, they're going to delete it. They'll never look at it. And I've also learned too, and some of this has evolved, to be honest with it. It used to be that you would send a press release to a reporter in a PDF format because you didn't want them to change a word. You didn't want them to do that. The problem with that, as we learned over time, was, and I have so many great friends who are reporters. I don't want to say reporters are lazy. Some of them are, but if you send it to them in a Word document, they can edit it. And hopefully they're going to be honest and edit it the right way and get your story out quicker. So sending PDFs was not a good idea. So that's evolved, over the last 10 years or so. So put the release, your press release, in the body of the email, not as an attachment. That makes them have to do one more thing to open that attachment. Just have the title of the release in the subject line and have the body in the email. And I promise you, your stuff's going to get seen and looked at. You have a better chance of getting it run.
I can't tell you how it drives me crazy when people send me a Word document, which I don't like opening anyway. And it says it's got like a sentence and a half in it.
Yeah.
And you're like, could you just not paste that in the email?
Yeah, that's true. It's also, as you well know, because of cybersecurity, sometimes it's not safe to open attachments. So you're really not
Mhm.
doing yourself a favor by sending attachments. So, and I think press releases need to be upbeat and positive, because remember what you're doing. You're advocating for yourself and you're advocating for the client, for the candidate. If you're negative, it's going to invite that reporter to want to investigate the issue further. And you might be setting yourself up for some investigation into an area that you don't want to talk about. So be positive. Timing, if the press release arrives in the morning, you have a better chance of getting it printed. Now, what I do is I always do a follow-up phone call to the reporter that I've sent the press release to make sure they got it. They also then know that I think it's important because I took the time to call them. And a lot of times that press release then develops into a story because I took the time to follow up. This goes back to knowing your media, knowing your reporters. What do they want? What format? When did they go to press, go to air? Those things are all very important to know. And sometimes different outlets have different rules. When I did IOPL, one of the subject matters we talked about was how to work with the press. And I heard a lot that people would say things like, you can't trust the press. They're all out to do you in. They're not going to be honest. They're not good. That is not wrong. That is not right. That is not right. They're just trying to do their jobs. And so make it easy for them to do their jobs. Develop a relationship with them. They're not going to be your best friend. And they're very clear that they're not there to be your friend. But be available to them. They need you and you need them. And the best thing that I find is when I find, if I go into a different market or I know a reporter is new, I'll call them up and ask them out for coffee. And that way they begin to understand me and who I am, and you develop trust. And I have people all the time who call me and say, hey, I need some help on X, Y, and Z. And you want to help them because they'll help you. So it's important to develop that relationship. Letters to the editor. These are very important. Ask donors, volunteers to write a letter for you. And again, when you see in the newspaper or online that someone has taken the time to write that letter, you're thinking, I know that person. If it's a notable person, it means a lot to me that they've endorsed a particular candidate. And maybe it doesn't have to be a notable person, but the content of what they're saying can be very relevant to me. So follow the paper's directions. A lot of times, all papers have different rules in terms of how many words, the timing where they want them. So for example, in the News and Record here in Greensboro, there's a 200-word limit. And they say no name calling. If it's something that's very negative, they will not accept it. Identify yourself truthfully. If you submit a letter to the editor, they're going to call you and make sure it's you that submitted the letter. And I think that's a really smart thing. Be timely. Don't wait until 2 days before the election and send it in. Usually they'll publish it in 5 to 7 days, but get on those things early. Keep the content local relative to your market or to your race. Be short, focused, and interesting, and use your own words. Don't use what someone else has written. Social media, and of course, Sue here is the guru of the world, quite frankly, on social media. But the most relevant sites for campaigns: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I have my own bias against Twitter, and that has nothing to do with Elon Musk. It's just that the limited number of characters, you can only get yourself into trouble by trying to explain your point of view on an issue, particularly if it's controversial, in 140 characters. It's just, you don't have the time, you don't have the capacity to really represent accurately, in my opinion, your point of view. So my candidates, we might do a little bit on Twitter, but really not a lot, mostly Facebook and Instagram. Sue has drilled this into my head, and I've gotten really good at it because of her. Use a social media posting calendar. And there are a number of tools that you can use, Hootsuite, Buffer, a lot of places, but you can actually craft your messages and decide where they go, which days they're going to hit, what time of day they're going to hit, and you can lay it out like a map and look at it in the whole. And it's just it's
And
a no-brainer.
I'm going to add something that I
Yeah.
used to be on the faculty of IOPL, and social media was my topic. TikTok didn't exist back then.
It's true.
My advice to you is never get a TikTok account.
Yep.
It is, I could talk forever about it, but basically you are being propagandized at by the Chinese government. No elected official or city-owned phone should have TikTok account on it. In fact, nobody should. But Ross is right. In a hyper-local election like city council, Twitter is not your friend. Facebook is your friend, and so is Instagram, and they draw completely different audiences. And there are certain days of the week and certain times of the day that you should consider. If you're looking for, and LinkedIn's not on here, but if you want to talk to small business owners, put it on LinkedIn at 6 a.m. because they're reading their stuff then they're having coffee, then they're taking a shower, then they're going to work, because small business owners start early. If you want to reach women who are slightly wealthier and vote, then you want to do Facebook, and you want to do it at 10 in the morning, because at 10 in the morning, young women who have babies, that's when they nap, and women are online. So there's a lot to know about this, and research, there's plenty of stuff online to learn about.
So just some final thoughts to wrap up a little bit. And I'm reprising again, the political environment today has never been more difficult. And my advice is be the change we all want to see. Whoever sees this presentation, we need you. We need people who want to serve. So be the change we want to see. Don't contribute to the mess that's out there, because there's a lot of it. But there's also importantly a lot of good too, and a lot of good people in politics. Unfortunately, we tend to hear only about those that are less good, shall we say. So be the change we all want to see. Focus on the issues, not attacking your opponent. And I'll tell you, I just helped one of my former students run for mayor of Raleigh. He came very close to winning. And what I told him to do was not to reference the person he was running against by name, by office, just to focus on the issues, what he wanted to do. And he almost won. And it was his first time running for office. And I think he'll have better luck next time. But he did everything absolutely right. He was so positive, and he only focused on the issues, and he got a lot of support for that reason. I always tell people, listen to those you don't agree with. You might learn something. And I have a lot of friends who feel differently about issues than I do. And what I try to do is really listen to them and understand why they feel that way, because clearly it might be something I haven't thought about. I don't have to agree with them, but I've respected them by listening to why they feel that way. And that is so important. The more we do this, I think we can turn around where we are. We can make a lot of progress in moving to a more respectful environment. So just listen to those that you don't agree with, and don't hate those that you don't agree with. Some of the best partnerships I've found are made between people with differing points of view. It's what makes life interesting, for crying out loud. You want to just associate yourself all the time with people who just think the way you do? How boring is that?
Ross, Liz has her hand up.
Sure.
Just have a quick question, and this is really any one of our officials can answer. I noticed that, of course, the minimum to run is 21. Do you think that age should be a little higher than that, or do you think 21 is a suitable age to run? And I
That's a
only say
question.
that because, I mean, and this is just personal. When I look at a 21-year-old, you know, I don't know how experienced one may be. So, you know, has anyone ever thought that that may be something to place on the table so far as raising, you know, the age?
Is that young man in Florida who was elected to Congress, is he 25?
I believe so.
Yeah,
I-
he's the one who couldn't get an apartment.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Tammy, what do you think?
I think I'm good with somebody running. It's up to the public whether or not they want to support them. You know, if there are 21-year-olds that are more mature and have been through more in their life than a lot of 30-year-olds or 35-year-olds. So I think it really depends on the person. But I would say, sure, run. You know, why not run? And then it's up to the public to decide.
Cool. Okay. Let's, I think that takes us to getting in
Ta-da.
touch with Ross.
yeah.
If, my advice is if you're even thinking about running or being a campaign manager or anything like that, get in touch with Ross first. Don't
happy to
file
talk-
first. Talk to Ross.
I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime. So feel free to reach out in any way you'd like.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we are at the end of our PowerPoint, but that doesn't mean we're at the end of our, hang on a minute, I need to close PowerPoint. There we go. I have some questions unless anybody else has questions or thoughts that they'd like to share. So anybody here have a question, an idea, a point to make? Something to add? We can all unmute ourselves, and Regina, and I don't know how to pronounce Felita. How do you say Felita's name?
Believe it.
Felita, okay. Do you have any questions, any points you want to make?
Felita is a graduate of the Institute of Political Leadership. She's been through the advanced version and the 4-month program, and I'm very proud to say that she's one of mine. As is Tammy.
Yes.
As is Tammy. So-
Ross, this is Regina. I
I
just did NCIOPL
Yes.
and just this last past
Oh,
winter.
great. Great.
So Brad had talked about you. So when I saw it, I decided to join. I
Oh.
find it all very fascinating. So thank you for
Oh,
being.
wonderful. Yeah, Brad was my student in, I think it was the spring of 2015.
Okay.
And so,
Mm.
yeah, it's an outstanding
Some
program.
of the programs that the other instructors did and what Ross arranged for with IOPL were just stunning. I mean, people went to radio stations and practiced interviews. They did how to look in front of a TV camera, what to wear, what to say. There were how to write things and how to, it was a it was 11 weeks, 11 weekends or
It's
something.
11 weekends over the course of 4 months.
And it was
it's
in 3 parts of North Carolina.
Yep.
And this was the greatest group. I met Jose, who wound up, he was from Guilford College. He was a kid. And he wound up at Replacements running their pack.
Yeah.
So there's so much you can do around here.
And Sue, he's now chief of staff to our superintendent of education.
Right. And Liz,
Darn, I didn't, good for him. He
Yeah.
was a good kid.
and Liz, to your question earlier, Jose was 20 when he went through the program. I didn't realize he was 20. I don't know how I missed that. But I tell you something, he was, he had been in this country for 4 years at that point in time. His slang was better than mine was, really. And so mature, well-spoken, I would have, I mean, anything he wanted to do at that age, he could have done. And he's just, we're going to continue to see really outstanding things from him.
He was a good
And,
young
and,
man.
and let me say, trust, I understand. I was just asking the question because.
Oh, sure, it's okay.
Yeah, it's I'm not opposed to it. I was just wanting
Sure.
to see
Okay,
what you all is.
Felita has her hand up. Felita?
Hey, everybody. My name is Valletta.
Okay, thank
Anywho,
you. Thank you.
In regards to Liz's question, do you all think that she talked about the 21 age limit, but do you think it should be an age limit at the other end?
That's a great question.
And also term limit.
Great question. What does everybody think on that? That's a great question.
Ooh,
I'll speak up in terms of, it's not popular, but I do believe in term limits. I think that's important. I think that, for a couple of reasons, I think it gives you a sense of urgency of getting something done. I also think it's important that we have fresh ideas coming on and, keep things moving, but that's just me. I don't know.
isn't our
Others
What
feel
governor,
about the age?
Age is hard to say. I think it's kind of like 21 because,
and what about the other end?
well,
I think that's what
again,
she's
I think
saying.
it's hard to say. Some people if people will elect you at some point, then,
I mean, they're having some conversations about two senators who are over 90
yes.
and up for election. And will they run? I don't know what the senator in California is going to do, but there's another guy. He's a Republican, but I don't remember his name.
It was
He's
Grassley. He just got
right.
reelected.
Yeah. So apparently it's so much easier for an incumbent, I think, because they have often name recognition. Even though Mary Kay's last name is hard to pronounce, everybody knows who she is because she's all over the city and she's an incumbent. And it's hard to run against an incumbent. I think it's harder. I don't know, unless it's a bad person, but that's not.
I want to say one thing about the age limit. I met an 88-year-old congresswoman who would have run circles all around all of us. I've forgotten her name, but she was actually from Kentucky, where I was born, where I was from, but she represented a district in New York. And I'm telling you what, that woman could walk faster than I could. She was running circles around the other people. So I think it all depends on the person, their health, and do they have the stamina? All of those things. I think it just really depends. She was smart as a tack.
I see what the people on our city council do every day. When you're talking about statewide national office, it's like times 1,000. And I don't know that I could keep up with it. I don't know. All right. Valletta, right? Is that I said that right? Did that
Valletta.
answer your question?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
I mean,
What
I
do you think?
personally, it's
What do you
just,
think?
my personal opinion is that it should be term limits and age limits. That is great if you are 95 and you have all of your faculties. I think that is wonderful. That is a blessing. But spend your later years doing something else.
Okay.
I mean, that's just
No,
that's my opinion.
that's your opinion. That's your call. You're go for it, girl. That's good. Our governor in North Carolina, Governor Cooper, he's term limited this year, right?
Yes.
Right.
Oh, you can only serve 2 terms consecutively. He can come back 4 years and run again as
Jim Hunt did, yeah.
Governor Hunt did.
Yeah,
Governor Hunt served 2 8-year periods.
I think McCrory tried, but he didn't get elected.
No, he lost the second time.
Okay. Does anybody, we are almost at 7:30. I have a feeling the bunch of us could go on all night, but everybody's got life out there. So if you have any final questions, ask them now. And Ross, I'm going to ask you to wrap this all up and give us a summary of it. The most important stuff to know.
Well, I just had that last slide, which was
Great.
my final
It was
thought.
a great session. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, I just think, I think we all have to think positively about where we are. I mean, I think there's a lot of good going on out there. There really is. And I think, unfortunately, people focus on the bad we can't let that get us down. We need to just keep fighting to make a difference. It can happen. It really can. And I'm just so grateful to these people online here who have run. I mean, I know that, like I said, I made the decision that I did not want to be a candidate, but I wanted to be a strategist, and that was the right thing for me. But I think anybody that chooses to run, and I just admire them so greatly, because it's not easy.
Ross,
thank
is Henry awake?
Henry just woke up and changed positions in his bed, but I think
Oh, I was
it's time
wondering
for him
if
to
you,
eat. It's
I
time
was
for him to eat.
wondering if you wanted to put him on camera as our closing screenshot.
I'm not sure I can effectively move the computer well enough to show you.
No,
but
I was going to say pick up the dog. I wasn't-
he weighs 30 pounds, and
Oh,
it'd
okay.
be a
I've got-
deadlift from where
I've
he is
gotten a-
now, so.
Mine's 11 pounds. It's a little easier. All right, ladies, and it is ladies. Thank you very much for being here. Liz, thank you very much for the city's help with doing this. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate. I know many of you have had a very long day, and I appreciate your time and your comments. They were fabulous. So
Thanks,
this
everybody.
will
Really
be
do
on
appreciate you being
YouTube,
here.
and I'll send you
Thank
the
you.
link when it's posted.